Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I was invited here to speak for the whole time of the session, but I'm a policy person, as Brendan sort of went into. We use data a lot, and we also help other organizations to solve problems using data. So I'm very quickly going to pass it on to Wayne Groszko, who's one of the key people I work with very closely in EnergyDATA, to talk a little bit very specifically about some of the data we're seeing around solar. But I did want to give just a quick perspective from me and from our department as to how we use EnergyDATA. So yeah, very quickly, as I was introduced, I work on the electricity policy and programming team in the Sustainable and Renewable Energy branch of the Department of Energy and Mines. So we have a very specific and defined mandate within the broader department. We are tasked with working closely with a whole variety of stakeholders to implement policies and programs to reduce greenhouse gases and transform our energy economy while making sure we maintain affordability to address that energy poverty point. There's a little bit of an asterisk here because this is a little bit of a Frankenstein statement from both our official mandate and our most recently released business plan. So there's a whole lot more detail in terms of the mandates that guide what we do, but you're able to find that online if you're interested. For also clarification, our group, the Sustainable and Renewable Energy Group, is divided into three sort of key teams. The Energy Efficiency and Buildings team, of which I see some folks here today, the Electricity Policy and Programming team, which I work on, and the Climate Change and Infrastructure team. So as I say, I'm going to lead into Wayne talking specifically about solar, which is a program within the Electricity Policy Group. But if anybody has any questions about some of the programs and policies in the other groups, I can either direct you to folks in the room or do my best to answer those questions. So today we're talking about energy data. We need it a lot, and I understand we're on Brendan's side here in that we need data, and we need it all the time. We need a lot of different kinds of data. We need technical data, we need environmental data, we need socioeconomic data, we need geographic data. We need it quickly, we need it very defined in local situations, but we also need it aggregated. We need it to be frequently delivered, but we also need it to be responsive and flexible to different policy needs as they change. And there's no centralized place for us as policymakers to get that data. So the scorecard that Brendan shared is a really good example of one of those sources of information that we could go to make policy decisions that does a really good job of bringing in lots of different perspectives from different sectors to answer a specific question around energy efficiency. But we, in the electricity sector, often look to some of the sources cited there, not data from Star Trek, but this was a late slideshow creation, and it's Friday. So I talk a lot with Natural Resources Canada. We rely on our utilities to provide us data, both Nova Scotia Power and Efficiency Nova Scotia. We rely on industry associations like CanSIA, the Canadian Solar Industries Association. We rely on international sources of data like NREL, and we also rely on advocacy groups like Affordable Housing Nova Scotia to provide us with some of that social perspective that we need to make good energy policies. And just sort of lastly, not only do we consume and interpret data in order to make decisions, part of our role is also to help others make decisions. And we do that in a variety of ways. We support data generation and collection by other stakeholders. So for example, one of the really exciting projects that came through our last round of low carbon communities, which is a funding program, was for the KMKNO, the Mi'kmaq Rights Initiative, to do a whole bunch of benchmarking on their community buildings. So that's a way that we fund the creation of data for another organization to solve their own internal problems. We do a lot of work with our partners to produce reporting and analysis around problems that we're interested in. So for example, we work with Wayne and Solar Nova Scotia, and I see Christy here, to produce a series of reports around solar. And those reports were really critical for us to make decisions about developing solar homes and other sorts of solar policies and programs. One of the other key ways we work with EnergyDATA and folks here in the room is we try to make it more accessible. So we work with community groups and other marketing stakeholders to increase energy literacy and make sure that the excellent work that you do in the room is available and digestible to the people who need it to make decisions. So one of the really cool things that we did last year was develop this platform called Solar Assist. And Solar Assist takes in a whole bunch of information like your address, you put information about the slope of your roof and how shaded it is, and the platform sort of pulls together all of the information about the existing solar homes incentive and pops out an estimate as to how much it would cost you, how much money you could save, what sort of financing mechanisms are available to you. So that's one way that we can take what is a lot of really technical, maybe inaccessible data for your average individual in Nova Scotia and make it accessible to them. And we're also interested in those sorts of programs. So the last two examples here that I used are solar examples, and that's very purposeful to lead into some of what Wayne is going to talk about. But as I said, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to be up here answering questions with Wayne after the fact, and I look forward to seeing what he presents for us. So thanks.
Is it all right if I take this out? All right. I like to walk around a bit. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It's 10:30 right now. How much time do I have for this part? So I have 10 minutes. Okay. Great. And thanks, Sheena, for the first half of this part. Leading on from, the need for data and the value of data, I decided to really dig into a particular set of data that I hope you'll find interesting. And it's about the Nova Scotia solar energy incentive programs. And in particular, mostly I'm going to focus on the Solar Homes program, which many people in the room would be very familiar with. The Solar Homes program has been running for, a year and a half now. And it is offered at the start, it was basically, if you were to put in a residential solar installation, a photovoltaic, you would get back, as a homeowner, $1 per watt for the installed cost, up to either 10,000 or 40%. And as you can see, that amount of incentive has gone down over time, which is a fantastic sign of success because it's had a tremendous amount of uptake, this program, as we'll see. But basically, the goal here with this program, and it's a program that was designed and is being implemented, designed by the province of Nova Scotia and is being implemented by Efficiency Nova Scotia. And the spoiler alert is it's an enormous success, in my view. So what has happened, and I'll first shout out to Dave Corning, who is here somewhere in the room. Dave helped me with this by providing some of the information that you see here. And this is straight from Dave, who runs the program at Efficiency Nova Scotia. Up to the end of 2019, 1,900 applications were received for this program. And $11.8 million in rebates back to people were committed. If you'll recall, the goal of this program is to have 2,000 installations installed by 2022. I'd say we're off to a very, very good start. So 700 have been completed, and as we'll see, there's always a bit of a time lag in photovoltaic installations. For those who have worked in the industry or do, it takes a while to get all the permits, the design, the installation, the inspections, the net metering agreement. I have a slide later on the time lag in that. But basically, the fact that 700 have already gone in is an enormous success. And $5.6 million in rebates have been paid. And key here, I'm going to figure out how to use this. 6.5 megawatts of new solar capacity has been installed on people's individual homes. Now think about that number for a moment. You could get 6.5 megawatts of capacity by putting up a couple of huge wind turbines. But that's not the point of this exercise. This exercise is to get a wide spectrum of people involved in the renewable energy transition, which it's definitely doing. And this is a bit about the geographic distribution. So you see fairly good coverage. So these points represent, and thanks to Dave, approximately where each of these successful applications or installations is. And it almost follows the population density map. Half the population in Nova Scotia lives in Halifax Regional Municipality, so obviously there's a lot there. Quite a cluster in Kings County, a little bit around the South Shore, a bunch up in Sydney, and kind of spread out everywhere else. So reasonably good coverage. If you look at where I got, well, the next data that I'm going to talk about, it was from the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board report from Nova Scotia Power on the net metering interconnections. Now, this will take a little bit of explanation, but many people are familiar with it, but it's a funny pie chart to start with. It's just one circle. This is all of the net metered installations recorded in the report to the Utility and Review Board over the entire life of the Nova Scotia net metering program, which started in 2001. And speaking of data and the importance of data, the fact that Nova Scotia Power is required by law to report all this information to the Utility and Review Board by January 31st every year is essential to making things like this possible and feasible, meaning us being able to discuss how these programs are going. Almost, and it's an important caveat, almost all of the distributed solar electricity installed in Nova Scotia so far, it goes through this net metering program. So you get a pretty good snapshot by looking at this data, which is, once you can navigate your way through the kind of difficult website of the Utility and Review Board, but you'll get it eventually, then you're kind of smooth sailing. So since the program started in January of 2001, there are now 1,422 generating power systems doing net metering in Nova Scotia. Just very briefly, I love small numbers too, so I was looking for the smallest numbers in this record. And the smallest number was 1, when that was one system is recorded as having stopped operation. I thought that was interesting. It was a system that was installed in 2015, a pretty small system, and it has stopped working or stopped operating. It's off the list now. I'm curious why. I want to know why. But anyway, obviously most of them still are working, and a total of 11 megawatts of electricity generation capacity are being net metered. Oh, and that was my other caveat. You may be aware that the IKEA store in Dartmouth has a huge solar power system on it. It is not net metered, so it's not in this number. So add on IKEA and you've got 11.95 megawatts of solar approximately. Not counting anyone who's off-grid, right? These are only the on-grid ones. But off-grid is probably a fairly small number. So this next slide, ta-da, is really the kicker of this whole presentation. Of all the systems in net metering, 54% of them were installed last year. 54% were installed last year. So the amount installed last year was more than from 2001 to 2018 put together. And it's similar on capacity, actually. It comes to 54%, not just in numbers of systems, but in terms of capacity installed in kilowatts or megawatts. And that's because, as you see, the average system size hasn't really changed that much. It's increased a little bit. Now, what you have to think about is the overwhelming preponderance of residential systems. This program, Solar Homes, like its name suggests, is only for residential systems. So the commercial systems, which can also be net metered, are not included. Well, they're included in this number, but the residential systems overwhelmingly, especially in 2019, dominate the figures. So looking at now just residential system capacity installed, over the past 5 years, well, 6 years, I only went back to 2014 because before 2014, the bars are so small as there was hardly any point putting them up there. But what I did was to look at, just firstly to show in another form how big the increase was in 2019. And one might make the first assumption or hypothesis that it is because of the Solar Homes program. I think there's a good argument for that. But I think an important question to ask is, what would have happened anyway if the Solar Homes program had not existed? And so I looked at so the program started in June of 2018. And remember, this data is from the Utility and Review Board, so it's once they're actually installed. And there's a delay in between those things. You'll see later, but I looked month by month. And it wasn't until December of 2018 that things really started taking off, even though the program had started in June, in terms of installed ones recorded by the UARB. So the point being, 2016 and 2017 and most of 2018, this was already a growing industry. And that's important to note here. The Nova Scotia government is essentially supporting a winning horse. I mean, it was already out of the gate. By 2016, 2017, the average growth rate of solar PV installations was already 52% per year, year on year. So what I did, now this is going to be totally approximate, and feel free to pick this apart if you want, but I said, what if that Solar Homes program hadn't existed and the growth rate had just remained at 52%? And that orange bar is what I sort of guesstimate you would have seen in the absence of the Solar Homes program. So my rough estimate here is that of that almost 6 megawatts in 2019, about 3.9 megawatts, or almost 4 megawatts of it, almost 4 megawatts of it was, let's say, I hesitate to use causal relation, but it's certainly very strongly correlated with the existence of the Solar Homes program. I would call this program a huge success. Now, I just wanted to dig into one more thing, and I'll wrap it up pretty soon. I think I'm just about to the end of my time, but what this did, I looked at it month by month, because now we're getting into so many installations that you can actually look at it month by month. It wouldn't have mattered in 2014 because there was smaller numbers. But a couple interesting things. Just about every February, there's a huge drop. This February, they just do not get connected. I can't imagine why. Again, I mentioned June of 2018 is when the program actually started, and December of 2018 was the first month when you saw, when I'm like going through this data, I'm like, whoa, what happened in December 2018? Because like, bam, that was the essentially nearly 6-month delay between program start and really starting to see stuff happen. So I don't have much time left to go, so I'll just say key results, obviously large and rapid increase in residential solar PV installations. Here's an interesting one, and Dave can correct me if the starting number's wrong, but in the program you have to be a registered installer. You have to get a registered installer to qualify for the rebate, and there's 62 on that list now. I think there were 6 or so when they started. That's a huge increase when you look at developing an industry in the province. That has some implications. Now it's possible for large amounts of solar to be developed in our province because we have a bigger supply of suppliers and installers. I'm speculating here, but it looks to me like the program target will probably be met early, which hopefully may mean that it might be exceeded. Certainly on that trend right now. It raises some questions. I think some big questions going forward that might be important in 2021. This year, I think we're probably just going to ride this wave for one more year. But what happens next? This program obviously it will eventually end or change form or something will happen to it. So I think we need to concern ourselves with, now that we have built this much bigger industry, what is the next stage? And then just a moment about non-residential buildings. So commercial, institutional, charitable, those are all listed in the UARB report as well, and they're much smaller numbers in terms of number of installation and total capacity, although capacity per project is bigger. If you can imagine, you've got a big warehouse, you could put 100 kilowatts, whereas average is 8 for homes. But there's almost no increase. In fact, 2019 saw a decrease in both the number and capacity installed in the non-residential sector. So I think it raises an interesting question as to might be worth considering what could be done, what combination of factors could help increase commercial or non-residential installation rates, because there's a lot of huge potential there. I really will wrap up very soon, but to very briefly mention, because we're talking about plural programs, there is another provincial solar program, which some of you are familiar with, Solar Electricity for Community Buildings, and that is having some interesting progress as well. It is structured completely differently. Community groups bid a price in to win a power purchase agreement. And that's been happening for 3 years, 2017, 2018, 2019. And this is just a summary. You can get this straight off their website, so I didn't dig into it as deeply. But a total of 71 projects have been approved, and 3,741 kilowatts, so 3.7 megawatts. So there's another significant number of megawatts if they all get built. And that's the big question with this program. It's clear already that they won't all get built, because I know some personally that have changed form or been canceled. Probably the most interesting thing about this program is because people were bidding in prices, it gives you an idea of what people think it costs to produce solar electricity in Nova Scotia at the 50 kilowatt level and make some kind of a return. So really solidly 26 cents per kilowatt hour and not changing in terms of average price. So key results, I basically already said all that, except that, and again, someone else in the room probably has a more up-to-date number than I do, but in our record, because as Dane will speak about later, we're getting some data from these projects as well, at least the ones that are connected now, and we see 17 of them in our data feed so far that appear to be operational. So that does raise the big question for this program, is to, by the time the 2 years is up, which is the time limit on building them, how many of these will have actually been built? Very quick acknowledgements to many of the folks and organizations who keep our lab running, and especially Efficiency Nova Scotia for helping run that program and helping provide data. And thank you very much.